Hello and welcome to Rules and Ramblings. My name is Nomad. His name is Maxen.
Hello.
Today we're gonna start
Introductory.
the start of a beginner in quotation series. So this will be the first of 3 episodes. The first episode will be Imperium. The next episode will most likely be Chaos, and then we'll end off with the Xenos. So if there's a certain faction you'd like to hear us talk about,
You can just cut straight to that episode instead of listening to the other two, or listen to one big one and being like, where's the faction I want to learn about?
right? Exactly. So today we'll be starting with Imperium. If you guys are looking for Chaos or Xenos, we'll get there.
Future videos. Or future sound bites?
Hmm. So before we get into it, I want to make a couple disclaimers. So because you're going to be stuck with 10th edition for the next few years at least, we'll be talking about how they play in 10th edition, but we want to try and future proof this a little bit. So part of what that means is we're going to be spending a little bit of time for every faction discussing how psychic they are. If you aren't aware what psychic means, basically how magic they are. How many wizards do they have? How many spells do they cast? If you're familiar with 10th edition, but not ninth or earlier editions, basically there was a phase in between movement and shooting called the psychic phase. You would have your psyker units, you would give them certain spells that they could take, and then you would spend 15 minutes casting spells.
Basically.
While the rest of us would spend 15 minutes taking models off the board.
Or I would spend 15 minutes casting spells. Well, no one else had the ability to. Until recently.
I cast Smite. I cast Smite again. I cast Smite one more time.
Yeah.
Oh, I rolled snake eyes. I die.
Burn. Ah, damn. Pairs of the Warp, no.
So technically the psychic phase is not applicable in 10th edition, but because it's really important to some armies' identities, looking at you, Grey Knights,
Yeah.
we kind of can't not talk about them. So just when we're talking about psychic stuff, just remember, okay, it's not really matter. Doesn't really matter in 10th edition. It might matter in later editions.
We're also going to be covering whether an army is more melee or shooting based as the way it's run. Most armies can technically be run either side, but all armies lean one way or the other, usually rather heavily. And then we will cover whether it is a horde or elite army. Elite meaning lower model count, with the models costing more points to run, but usually they're stronger or have some sort of extra abilities, while horde is just mass small little bastards that choke up the enemy's firing lines with their bodies.
Right, and because of where we are right now in the edition, there are currently 4 codices that you can buy, and there's one more that isn't out yet, but we know what their detachments are. So because we still want this to relate to 10th edition and not be completely like, I guess, edition neutral, we will be briefly talking about their army rules. But in case anyone watching this isn't familiar with how to actually play the game of Warhammer, but wants to know how a faction plays in general terms, we'll try to avoid talking about specific rules, like
Keywords.
certain keywords. Yeah, we won't get too into, oh, like you can give this stuff heavy or these weapons sustained 1. I suppose we should get right into it. Maxon, what do you want to start us off with?
Let's just get them over with. Start with Space Marines.
Ah, yes. Games Workshop's golden child, not you, Custodes. The Space Marines are gonna be our sort of baseline in quotations. It's they do everything you want them to do, and typically most people, when they're talking about how a faction differs from other factions,
They compare them to Space Marines.
they compare them to Space Marines, like, oh, well, these models are worse than Space Marines, or they're better in this way. Space Marines are fairly elite There's definitely more elite options, but they are certainly not cheap. Well, technically now they are with those points. Oh my god, but generally speaking, they're fairly elites. With the nature of Space Marines, you can really take them any way you want. So it's kind of hard to say, are they melee, are they shooting? Because they can do any of it.
They're pretty jack of all trades.
Generally speaking, they lean most of their units, especially the bigger ones, lean more towards the shooting side.
Especially the Codex compliant chapters.
Yeah, so Space Marines are typically separated into the Codex compliant chapters and the special snowflake chapters. If you're Codex compliant, you like shooting. If you're not Codex compliant, you don't. As far as Psychic goes, they're not great, they're not awful, but as a Space Marine player, you have librarians, and you only typically take like one in a list max, but you have your choice. There's the regular librarian, the Phobos librarian, the Terminator librarian. I think that's it. I thought there were more.
Technically, there's character librarians and stuff too.
Oh yeah, I can't take character librarians.
Like
Tigurius, blah 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 blah.
Tigurius, Dante, not Dante. Fuck, what's his name? The Lord of Death.
Mephiston? Oh,
Yeah,
I hate them.
Mephiston.
I hate Mephiston's model.
Edgy boy. He's funny though. His lore is hilarious.
Right. So as for Codex compliant chapters, you really can do whatever you want. We're not going to get into detachments here, but it's like if you want to run heavy vehicles,
They got something for that. If you want to run mass infantry, they got something for that. If you want to run half infantry, half mechanized, you can do that. They got what you want. Jack of all trades.
right? But most of those are more shooting focused. If you want to go more melee, then you got to look to the special people. So to start off with, we got the Blood Angels, which are the only cool ones. Black Templars, if you think Days Volt means from 2016 with a peak of comedy. Space Wolves, if you're a furry. Death Watch player, if you're 83 years old.
Or you're like one of the three out there.
Shout out to all my 3 Death Watch players. King's Workshop doesn't remember you, but I do.
You guys have cool looking armor. Too bad they don't remember that you guys exist.
When I was starting out, I almost went Death Watch.
Good thing you didn't. They got forgotten even more than Iron Hands did.
Oh god, don't fuck with this Iron Hands players. There's like 2 of us in the war is punishment enough.
Hey, there's more than 2 of you. You guys have an entire Discord server that Adeptus Ridiculous are banned from.
I know, that was really funny. They got I
banned
think they were a little
times.
butthurt. I think they were a little butthurt about it, but it was funny.
They really got ahead of themselves.
I forgot Dark Angels.
Are Dark Angels not Codex compliant?
No, because they have their own like Codex supplement.
Oh yeah.
Almost forgot Dark Angels. They're the guys you play when you're really into like the knight aesthetic.
And you don't want to play Grey Knights. No, Nomad for the 10th edition specific faction rule for Space Marines.
All right. I don't have a lot to say for Space Marines. They're a pretty basic faction. They got a really basic army rule. Oath of Moments. Basically, in the start of your turn, you pick an enemy unit and you just do better at shooting against it. You used to be even better at shooting against them, but Games Workshop was like, no fun for you.
It was too strong. Eat shit.
Iron Hands were a little nuts.
End of 9th edition, Space Marines were a little nuts. Iron Hands are the little nuts at the end of every edition. Forgotten about in the lore, remembered in gameplay. I hate you.
So that's the basic boys out of the way. Let's get to something cooler. What do you want to do next?
Let's go to the other end of the spectrum and get the other power armored boys out of the way. Grey Knights.
Grey Knights. Oh, Grey Knights. I got words with Grey Knights.
I like that there's psychic bars all the way up. That's fucking great.
Everyone's a psyker.
I can't imagine in 9th edition, do they all get to cast spells?
Yeah. Even like the Strike Squad, they could cast like a few spells.
That's nuts.
Yeah, that's why I want to play 9th edition Grey Knights.
Warp Charge, you're gonna climb real fast.
Hell yeah. Well, no, because the Warp Charge only went up if you're casting Smite.
Is it only Smite that causes it to go up?
I'm pretty sure it's only
I
smite.
thought it was all psychic powers.
All right, so Grey Knights, aka the Gary Stews of the setting, aka the reason we had to talk about psychics.
AKA the cool Space Marines.
Listen, we're allowed to say that. We also hate Matt Ward, but can still admit Grey Knights are pretty cool.
Grey Knights are really cool. Some of their lore is a little fucking wacky and questionable, but I still enjoy most of it.
So Grey Knights, on the surface, looking at them, seem very similar to Space Marines because they're just Space Marines. But outside of them being a little slightly more elite than Space Marines, they couldn't be any more different. Whereas typical Space Marines lean more towards shooting, Grey Knights are very heavy in melee.
And their force weapons are super cool.
Right, like every unit still has shooting. Some of them are better than others, but the force weapons are where it's at. And what makes them really different is their psychic power. From what I remember, keep in mind, I never played Grants in 9th edition. I started collecting in 10th. Every single model, every single unique model that isn't just a Space Marine model is psychic, can cast psychic powers of some kind. 10th edition, not so much. You got the Librarian, has like a psychic aura, that's it.
People are really mad about that, actually.
Yeah, we are. Are you kidding me?
I mean, I'm mad for you guys. I don't even play Grey Knights. I just think they're cool. But, like, they really neutered the psychic faction of Space Marines by giving them those psychic powers.
Well, the biggest problem with Grey Knights right now is that we have no anti-tank. Or I guess we have no anti-tank.
Yeah, and you guys also went from being wizard Space Marines to being teleporting Space Marines.
Yeah, speaking of teleporting, the main thing with Grey Knights is Space Marines as a whole are pretty slow. Generally speaking, they have like a 6-inch movement. This is the standard, which is not a lot in 40k. It really isn't. Normal Space Marines, the way you get around that is by having transports. Grey Knight, technically they do. They have land raiders and stuff, but
Can they get yeah? But Land Raiders are lame.
and they're not very good for Grey Knights. So the way Grey Knights get around is with their army rule, teleport assault. Basically, at the end of your opponent's turn, you can choose a certain amount of your own units and then just take them off the board and then teleport them into your next turn. So Grey Knights, if Space Marines are a really easy beginner faction, Grey Knights are really hard because to properly play Grey Knights, you need to have really good positioning and be able to use your teleports to their maximum. Or you just run Cassell and Crow with 10 Purifiers and Kelder Drago and slay out.
I do enjoy that Kelder Drago is relatively strong, at least for like his stats.
I love his ability. It's so much fun. Just add 3 inches to the charge.
It is useful. There's actually a point in taking him, unlike I'm pretty sure 9th edition where he was half useless.
Yeah.
And it was better to just take Castellan Crow. Alright, and moving on from Grey Knights, Nomad, where do you want to move to?
Well, we just did 2 fairly elite armies. The rest of Imperium is pretty horde, is what I would say if I was a liar. Let's get the elites out of the way. Let's take the banana boys.
The Adeptus Custodes. Alright, so the Adeptus Custodes are a very elite army, to the point that they are one of the cheapest armies in the entire tabletop game, if not the cheapest, to make a full 2,000 point list of. To the point that a full 2,000 point list of Custodes may have like 24 models, and that's everything.
And that's not even vehicle heavy too. That's just infantry. Like my Space Marine list has
Yeah.
like around 20, 25 model or like 30 models, but I also run 5 dreadnoughts because I'm a shitter.
Which I despise. You are a shitter. Yeah, the Custodes may bring like a dreadnought that contributes to that, but even if they don't, they'll have like maybe a squad of bikers and then a few squads of normal Custodes and a squad of Sisters of Silence if they're feeling cool, and then they'll bring like Trajan Valoris and call it a day, and that's like most of a army right there. It's insane. They make up for this by having really strong melee. They have shooting, it's just not super good, but they absolutely fucking melee. and they are much tankier than normal Space Marines. Where normal Space Marines have 2 wounds, basically their health, all Custodians have 3 wounds minimum. Never mind captains having more and Trajan Valoris having like 7 or something. And he fucks shit up in more melee than every other Custodian does.
Wow, these guys seem really cool. I bet they got really good psychic powers.
That's where you'd be wrong.
What?
In fact, they have anti-psychers. The Sisters of Silence are specifically meant to be positioned near psychers to prevent them from doing psychic bullshit. Because no Custodian is a psychic. All of them are anti-wizards. They don't need your fucking warp bullshit. They're too cool. Glorious banana boys. And for their specific army rule, it's called martial kata. Basically, whenever you're gonna fight someone, you select one of 3 stances. Is it 3?
It is 3. That's
From making your custodians tankier to making them better at dealing with horde, or making them better at dealing with elite units. They're pretty good at kind of just fighting everything, as long as they can get into melee. That's the main issue with Custodes. They're slow, which is funny because in lore they're actually really fast, but in game they are balanced by being slow.
I mean, I think they're slightly faster than Space Marines. They actually
Are
might be
they?
6
I thought they had
inches.
5 inches.
The Terminators do.
Or am I
but,
thinking? I'm thinking of Terminators.
like the Hilarious or whatever they're called, Termies. Yeah, no, they're 6 inches.
Yeah, they're slow, but once they get into melee, or if they can get onto a control objective, they just stay there. They don't have to move. They don't have to go and chase anyone. Just sit on the objective, make the enemy come to you. It's really hard to kill a Custodes once they're in somewhere where they're going to just stay. That's why they bring so little models, because every model is very tough to kill.
Right, and while we're here, it's probably gonna like say it now. If it wasn't already obvious, the main draw of elite armies is that besides being cheaper, they all of them hit hard.
Stronger
But because
units.
of that, every death hits hard.
Yeah.
If you're playing a horde army, like I don't know, if we do guard next, you bring like drop 90 conscripts, or they don't have those anymore. It's just Cadian shock troops.
Troopers.
You drop 90 Cadians, 30 of them die in one turn. You're like, whatever, acceptable casualties. You lose one Custodes, you're gonna feel it.
Yeah. That's the other main thing with Custodes, is due to your lack of models, they're a difficult faction to learn how to play as correctly, because you have to get really good at positioning them behind cover and using obscuring to your best ability. Because until they get to a point, they are they are just basically out in the open cannon fodder for any shooting that might happen. But once they get there, they'll be a lot better and able to stick in. It's just crossing the board. The first 2 turns are basically your enemy's time to fuck you up. But once it hits turn 3, you should be able to have like crossed most of the board to what's the word I'm looking for? Cross the distance?
Fuck shit up.
There's a word that evades me currently, but people probably know what I mean. They just have to be able to get to the person that they're trying to get to, and then the person basically just dies. So anyway, now that that's over, now where?
Well, I mean, technically, we got one more quote unquote elite army, but that's a bit of a weird patch. Eeny, meeny, I pick.
Sisters.
Sisters. Adeptus Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle. The nuns with guns. The insert another descriptive term. Yes, the Sisters of Battle are a very unique army. The one that I enjoy. I don't play them. Technically, I don't play them, but they are an army I do really think is cool, and I'm probably going to play one of these days. They're going to act as our sort of mediator from the more elite armies of the dudes in power armor to the horde armies that are to follow the rest of Imperium, with one exception. But we'll get there at the end because I got words to say about them. Sisters are much more horde than any of the other factions we mentioned, but because they're still people. They're just because they're just regular people. They're not enhanced in any way.
Other than the power armor.
They are in power armor, so they're still tankier than a typical guardsman. They're close range, but they kind of, depending on how you want to run the list, they kind of flip flop between shooting and melee. I want to say they're leaning a little bit
Pretty
more
even.
towards shooting, but it's pretty down the
Well, yeah,
middle.
they make prodigious use of flamers in their shooting for most lists, so there's a good chance that they're going to be close enough to also charge you next round if their shooting goes bad.
Yep, the trifecta of holy weaponry: bolters, flamers, and meltas. They also have no psychic, no psychers to speak of. They don't have anti-psyker like Custodes. They just have no psyker.
We're not going to talk about that that one chick. I was talking about the heretical saint.
Not Celestine.
No, Celestine's the living saint.
Yeah.
The heretical saint is the really buff sister that was in the Black Library in TTS.
Oh yeah, I didn't realize she was like an actual character. I thought it was just a meme.
No, that's a real
I should
character.
have assumed as much.
Her lore is basically like a bunch of people, or like everyone else in her group was dying, and they channeled all their like holy prayer power into her, which kind of made her a psyker, but like in a weird way. And then she fucked up all the people that were killing all of her fellow sisters and survived. She's viewed in a questionable light by the rest of the ecclesiarchy and the sororitas, which is why she's been named the heretical saint.
Very cool. Too bad we're not at Adeptus Mechanicus or any
name.
other lore channel, so
Not yet.
throw all that out. Not yet. Whatever, man. Sisters are a very interesting army because whereas on one end you have the elite armies that don't want to lose models, and on the other hand you have the horde armies that would prefer not to lose models, but know that they're going to lose them. Sisters actually want to die, but not in like a suicidal way, more in like a glory for the emperor kind of way. Essentially, so this ties into their army rule. Acts of faith. The way acts of faith work is at the start of a turn, you get a certain amount of dice called miracle dice. The way you get more of these by the at the start of your turn, and every time a Adeptus Sororitas unit is destroyed. What you do with miracle dice is you roll them, you keep them to the side on whatever number they rolled on, and then as you're playing the game, whatever you need to happen when you're actually playing the game and need to like move or shoot or fight or whatever, you can use those miracle dice to guarantee a
specific number.
A specific number, right? So if you like really want to hit something, you can, take one of your 5s or 6s or even 4s if that's what you need.
It basically allows you to put aside a few rolls so that you can slot them in later when you need them, so that you can kind of turn the tide a little bit and twist luck to your side.
Right, and because sisters rely so heavily on dying, they're what I would describe as a trade army. Basically, your units die fast, but they're really good at punching above their weights. Especially the melee units, a lot of them, at least the ones you typically run in a list, they won't last very long, but by God, they'll take some dudes with them.
Oh yeah, like penitent engines. They fucking melee, but they die real fast afterwards. Arcoflagellants are so bad at living that they have a 7-up save, which means they can't save from any damage. But they fuck up whatever they attack first before they get shot.
Yeah, if you don't know what a 7-up save is, roll a die or take a d6, a 6-sided dice used for Monopoly or whatever. Look at the sides and try to find where the number 7 is. Can't find it? Exactly.
Yeah, basically, if it's a 7-up, it just can't be done. So the sisters are so wanting to have some units just run in and punch above their weight and then die that they have some units that are just meant to do exclusively that. They're not meant to hold points or anything. You just send them in to die and fuck up the enemy's forces before they do so.
Right, and as such, no matter what list you build, you're going to have a very close range list. Whether that list is close range because of melee or because you're bringing a lot of flamers or meltas, you're gonna get in close. Which luckily you got the bodies to back it up. Speaking of bodies, Maxen, what do you want to talk about next?
I think it's about time for us to bring up the guard. Go to the highest extent of board.
Glory to the Astra Militarum. Glory to the first man to die. Guard. So to start off with Guard, they would be like the most elite, if not the second most, or not elite,
Most horde.
the most horde or second most horde in the game, if they didn't have Lehman Russes. Which takes us into the way Guards play. The Guards are a very horde, very shooting heavy. You have like 2 melee model units, like the Ogrins and Bulgrins, and I think that's it.
And they're pretty meh.
And they
Yeah.
have one Psyker, the Primaris. I think it's literally just Primaris Psyker.
I think they might have another one that's a part of like what you call it, a commissar support squad, the Sanction Psyker.
That's not a model though. That's not that I know of, unless it's in like a Cadian command squad. But it's definitely not in that.
I thought there was a Psyker that was in one of the command squads.
Not in the Cadian command
that
squad.
comes with a commissar.
I mean, it might be in
I
a
don't know,
box.
but they have maybe 2 Psykers, guaranteed one. The Primaris
you might
Psyker.
be thinking of the Primaris Psyker, which is one of the dumbest models I've ever seen. I hate it, but that's neither here nor there.
Bald lady.
Bald lady reaching for the Doritos. She's using her big Megamind brain to reach for the bag of chips. She looks like me when I've gone more than 6 hours without a Dr. Pepper.
That's a problem.
I don't drink that much Dr. Pepper. That was a joke. So Guard is a very command-focused army. Without getting like deep in the weeds, the start of every player's turn is the command phase, where basically you just buff units, handle certain things like whether like how scared or battle shocked your units become.
You gain command points, all that fun stuff. It's the start of each round, and during that time, the guard have officers in each unit, or at least in several units, they'll have officers. And at the command phase of each of these rounds, officers can. Is it one order? Yeah, it's one order, right?
It depends on the officer. So, like jumping off of that, this leads us into the guard's primary army rule, voice of command. Basically, every officer model you have, which can be like a tank commander, Cadian command squad, commissars, etc., you basically have them give orders to nearby units. There are a fair amount of orders that do whatever you would need your guard to do. Make them move faster, make them shoot better, make them do better in melee, make them tankier, make them shoot more.
Make them take less morale.
Right. So to do good as guard is to master guard is to master the command phase. If you can't effectively give out orders to your units, you won't last very long.
You're just gonna lose all your little dudes very fast because they're all very weak and they don't hit very hard. They're just real good at getting in other things' ways. But enough of them can kill stuff. So don't be mistaken. You can kill stuff with the guard. You can kill plenty of things. It just takes a lot of concentrated fire. Kind of why you bring the tanks.
Speaking of tanks, we mentioned before that they would be one of the most horde armies in the game, if not for one saving grace. That is their tanks. There are technically 3 main ways you can play guard in the most broadest of terms. Infantry, mechanized, or hybrid. Infantry is what we've been talking about. You just have a bunch of, super easy to kill dudes just out on the killing floor, trying to slay out, trying not to get slayed. But if you're like, man, that's really boring. I want to have 10 tanks on a battle that just bombard the enemy. Well, that's what the guard is really good at. Whether you have just typical Lehman Russ battle tanks, any of their million fucking variations, or you want to sit back with artillery from like a Basilisk or a Hydra.
Or get ballsy and bring a Rogel Doran or a Baneblade.
Baneblade.
And just take up half the middle of the battlefield. Baneblade's so big that when it dies, it becomes a piece of terrain. So if you put it in the right spot,
it becomes terrain while it's still alive.
oh yeah, it's terrain the entire time.
Hmm.
Yeah. So if you bring a Baneblade, you got to put it in the right spot, and it'll serve you well. But they're not very. It's not very good right now.
So now I have to look it up because I'm like super positive that's true, but I gotta just make
I
double
think
sure.
you're right. Or I don't think it's terrain. I think it just grants cover to nearby units. So it is terrain, but also kind of not.
Yeah, no, it's terrain. Each time a ranged attack is allocated to an Ashen Military model from your army, if that model is not fully visible to every model in the attacking unit because of this Baneblade model, that model has the benefit of cover.
Yeah. So basically, it's moving. It's a moving terrain piece. Does it stay when it dies, like it did in 9th?
Doesn't specify.
Hmm.
So yeah, 10th edition it might not stay when it dies. In 9th edition, you would literally keep it on the board and it would be terrain.
Which was a very cool rule that we were happy when they added.
Too bad it couldn't move
Yeah.
anywhere because the way terrain's set up. But I think that's enough about Guard. We got
Nah, man, we gotta talk more about their vehicles. They got basilisks. They got Hellstrike missiles. They got that's about it.
that's for the deep dive.
Yeah, it's fair. Oh yeah, you got Scout Walkers. Those are cool. Sentinels are real strong right now too.
All right, so that's with Guard out of the way. I guess that leaves only one option left.
Admech, the Adeptus Mechanicus.
Oh, those poor
one
guys.
of our good friends' favorite armies.
Oof.
And they are kind of rough right now. All of their points have been drastically reduced so they are now the most expensive army in the game to run, as you have to pay the most to field the amount of models you need to be able to take to fill out a full 2,000 point list, because their models are so cheap to run.
So, as far as how they play, you can just think of the way the Guard plays, but more, I guess, extreme. So the Admech is a very horde. No, not Admech. Guard is a very horde army, but they're redeemed by their tanks. Admech don't have that. They're just horde all the way through.
They do have vehicles, but most of their vehicles are pretty shit right now, to the point that they just get blown up in the first round, as our Admech player can attest to.
Ooh, I wonder who did that.
We both wonder who did that.
What a mystery.
What a mystery.
Goodbye,
Goodbye,
unfortunately, our Admech player has really bad cases of new model syndrome, but forgets that it's supposed to wear off once the models stop being new, and it just kind of persists. So back to what we were saying, Admech is a very, I guess, a weird word would be extreme. Like I already said this part. So they're way more horde than Guard because they have all the cheap models, but none of the expensive ones, like the Guard do for their tanks. They are way more. Honestly, actually,
their most expensive models is Belisarius Call, and it's like 275 points or something.
At a glance, you'd want to say that the Admech is more shooty than the Guard, but the more I think about it, the less I think that's true. Because when I'm looking back on it,
I think you're wrong. Shut up.
Yeah, well, our Admech players' typical lists include a couple Sicarian Ruststalkers and the Castellans. Oh my god, the Castellans. Oof, yeesh.
But he does also bring like 40 Scutari Rangers. Or 40
So,
Scutari Rangers.
Admech does have a lot of shooting, like the Guard, but they do have some real.
They have a few
hard-hitting
units that
melee
fucking
options.
melee.
No psychic though.
No
Guard
psychic
got
at
like
all.
one psychic model.
They don't have any anti-psychic either.
Admech is also a very character-heavy list that relies on being really good at the command phase, but whereas Guard have
while also only having a named character.
whereas Guards have a bunch of options for each of their characters, Admech is your character gets one ability and that's pretty much it. And whereas the Guards army rule allows them to have a bunch of options for their officers, Admech has one army-wide effect, and their army rule, Doctrina Imperatives. We have the two imperatives. The Protector Imperative is for when you're sitting back in your deployment zone and the enemy's pushing into you. Basically makes your weapons hit harder and makes you take less damage, sort of. Conquer Imperative is the opposite of that. It's when you want to push into them, but they're hanging back. It also makes your weapons better in a different way and makes the enemy take more damage, technically.
Or at least have a higher chance of taking more damage. Is it about that time?
So that's all the major armies we have. There's 2 factions left. I suppose we should start with the actual faction, which is the Imperial Knights. Now, the reason we put Knights last is because they're weird. So Imperial Knights is the most elite army in the game besides Chaos Knights, but that's for the Chaos episode. Imperial Knights is big stompy robots that go like they're not robots, they're mechs, they're Jaegers, they're Pacific Rim dudes. And when you want big stompy mechs to just fuck shit up.
Yeah, a list can have as little as like 5 models to as many of like 10 max.
Yeah, so with knights, you have your knights, which are your bigger models, and you have your armigers, which are
Small
still
knights.
big, expensive knights, but they're smaller.
And they're faster. They're like little scout knights.
Yeah, you have melee options, you have melee specific knights, but
The shooting knights are better.
well, also even your melee knights still have
shooting.
guns.
Yeah, and then there's a shooting knight that doesn't have melee.
And they have no psychic. The reason we put them here where we did is because I guess first before we get into that, we should talk about their faction rule. Their
Code chivalric.
Yes, code chivalric.
Or chivalric.
Basically, at the start of the game, you choose one of 2 codes or oaths. You get an ability related to that oath, and then you get a deed associated with it. This deed can literally just be one of the deeds is just killing the enemy warlord, which is their leader dude basically, and then controlling your opponent's deployment zone basically. You get like a bunch of command points if you complete an oath or the deed related to the oath. It's whatever. It's like it's kind of small, doesn't matter a whole lot.
Basically gives you a side quest, and if you finish it, you get a small buff.
Right. The reason we have them here is because I actually don't have this rule written down. I'm going to look it up really quick. So the reason we have them here towards the end is because of their ability Free Blades. Basically, if you can take a certain amount of points of your army and put them aside and fill them up with Imperial Knight units. This can be no, I lied. It is 1 Imperial Knight or 3 Armigers.
In any Imperium-based faction.
So a common strategy for Admech players, because they're so horde, is to bring a knight to be like a big centerpiece. Here's a big heavy thing.
Big tanky thing to complement all of our weak little boys.
Now, unfortunately, we couldn't completely hide our biases. Obviously, we kind of referenced like some armies being good or bad. We wanted this to be separate from that because, updates and changes will come. Some armies would be worse, some would be better. We can't account for that. But what I will say about the knights,
the thing is with knights is either you can fight them or you can't.
If you are interested in playing the Imperial Knights, especially if you're new, my biggest piece of advice to you is stop. Because you only bring a few models and each model is so important, you're not really playing 40k. The best way I've seen it described is from a Bricky video where someone told him playing 40k is like playing chess. But whereas the enemy or the other player has a full chessboard, the knight player has 6 queens and nothing else.
Yeah. Or if you have 3 big knights and like 3 to 6 armigers, it's like you have 3 queens and like 4 or 5 rooks.
What I'm getting at is that knights aren't a really fun faction to play against or play as.
They're just kind of cool to look at.
Because if you're playing against knights, the game basically comes down to one question: did you bring enough anti-tank? If the answer is yes, pat yourself on the back for a job well done and just, take the win. If not, you might as well concede turn 1 because you are not going to be having a fun time.
You can win by way of points still, but it's going to be a difficult fight because they're going to erase a unit every turn.
You're not going to have fun.
Yeah, and you're not going to kill any of their shit all turn or all game. You won't kill anything they have, so you'll be feeling like shit because you're not clearing any of their models off the board, and they're going to clear one of your units every single turn. So you're constantly just going to be fighting to keep stuff on points. Because if you lose all the points in the middle, you're probably just going to lose the entire game, and you might as well concede round 2. It's a very swingy army to fight against. Yeah, so basically our advice when it comes to knights is if you're going to get them, maybe get one to supplement another Imperial army. Do not go all in on a knight list. In fact, you should probably start with another army first and then be like, all right, which knight do I want the one that I bring to be? Because
Yeah, if you're really into knights, there's nothing wrong with having another army and then you just add a knight to them.
they are useful.
Now, if you don't care about playing the game and you just like want to have a big robot, why are you here?
Yeah, this is about rules.
This is for like people trying to play. But in that case, like, go wild. I don't care.
Yeah,
You
but
do
if
you.
you want to play the
But
game
the
and not
rest of
have your
us,
friends be pissed at you or just smash you every time, don't play knights.
especially because I've heard stories about like people getting into Warhammer. You know, everyone picks their faction, whatever it is, and the one person decides to play knights, and they buy a couple knights, and they play like a 500 or 1,000 point game to start off with, and no one's having fun because the knight just wins every single time.
And if you get to 2,000 points and the person you're fighting knows that they're fighting knights, they're gonna just bring a bunch of anti-tank, and you're just gonna lose in 3 turns as they fall all of your big shit.
To end off with, we have our last faction, quote unquote, the Agents of the Imperium, is because
Barely
they're
a
not a
faction.
faction. Like there's an index for them, there are rules for them.
They're supplementary force.
The reason we put knights before them is to kind of establish because knights are an actual faction, and to establish the idea of
Supplementary forces.
And Agents of the Imperium is purely
Supplementary. You cannot run them as their own thing.
right. I'm not gonna get so because of that. I'm not really gonna get into like how Hoarder elite they are. They're typically on the cheaper side. Um, a lot of them do like typically they're shooting base because it's just people, and they have a fair amount of psychers because it comes with several Inquisitor models, and a lot of those Inquisitors are psychers.
Or you can go the route of the assassins, which are a range of melee to psychic to big shooting.
So for every faction, we haven't really given a like unit recommendation because that's not what this series is about. For Agents of the Imperium, what I will say is like take some of the models, like the Exaction Squad is really good, or the Imperial Navy Breachers. If you're playing an elite army and you just need a really cheap small unit to kind of sit in the back and keep an objective. If you need like one character to do something really good, there are several assassin models available.
The Vindicare is very useful if used correctly.
There are Inquisitors, which I think they have auras that buff units.
I think so. I think it's like leadership stuff, like the Commissar.
If there's a part of your army that you're lacking in, and you're like, man, I really need someone to cover that, chances are Agents of the Imperium has something for you.
That's their whole point. They're to supplement what your army might be missing. They're not something you build heavily into because you cannot run them as their own thing. They're just meant to be run with the other Imperium stuff you're running.
All right. Well, I think that's all the Imperium factions covered. Games Workshop's main characters of the setting.
At least they're all well written.
Unlike some factions. We'll get to you, Votan. Nice character in a Space Marine book.
Nice writing.
Nice writing. Here, you guys have a whole paragraph to yourselves.
Good job being a reboot of a faction from fucking 2nd edition, and then just not getting any new lore.
Alright, well, I think that's all we have to say about the Imperium for now, unless there's anything you want to add.
No, I think that's about it, other than maybe like make rules for the Primarchs to be able to be run with the other sub-factions. Like maybe not like sisters, but like a Primarch being able to lead a group of guardsmen would be cool.
Yeah, Primarchs are a thing for later.
Yeah, I'm not going to explain what a Primarch is right now. Basically, just think of like super leader dude. There's 2 of them available right now for the Imperium. I think they should be allowed to lead other Imperium forces, or maybe like make a rule for like if you bring a Primarch, let you do like half and half on your army.
Thanks for sticking so far to the end. If you're experienced with any of these factions we covered in this episode, and you have like additional tips you'd like to share, by all means, please like tell us about them. On Spotify, we have like the Q&A you can talk about. We'll post it so people can see. If this ever goes on YouTube in the comments, between the two of us, we can't play every faction.
It's too expensive.
Too expensive. No. But we're just trying to help,
people find their way.
So for anyone new, if any of these factions are interesting to you and you want to know more, if you ask us, depending on the faction, we might do a deep dive in the future where we go really in depth about the play styles, like specific units to take,
army compositions, specific rules, stratagems that you can use with a specific army composition to pull off some wacky shit. Is all stuff we can go into.
Alternatively, I send you to your faction specific subreddit or Discord server. Every single faction's got one. People there love getting new people into their faction. They'll help you find your way, no problem. And depending on the faction, they'll do a better job than we ever could. But that's all we got this week. Anything else you'd like to say before we end off?
Goodbye.
I was going to say better myself.